All right, it is my pleasure to introduce the final panel discussion today, one that tackles AI and the energy workforce. The intersection of AI and energy creates new job opportunities and challenges, and skilled workers are needed to design, build, and maintain electrical, mechanical, and cooling systems. Data center expansion also boosts energy production needs. This panel will discuss some of the biggest challenges and opportunities the energy workforce needs to seize in this AI boom. So please join me in giving them a round of applause. Sit wherever you want.
This is horrible. Oh, come on. I hate being in the center of attention. I really do.
Okay, good afternoon. Hi, everybody. So first of all, I want to thank Costa Samaras and Daniel Twak for inviting us to be part of this panel and part of CMU Energy Week. It's been it's amazing to see all the energy here at Energy Week. So it's great. First of all, it's an honor to be on a panel with four of my colleagues. I'm just going to introduce them quickly in turn. Abby Smith, President and CEO of Team PA, and most importantly, a distinguished Heinz alum. Christophe Combemale, who's next, who's back there, professor at EPP, and I'm not trying to stack the table. He's also a Heinz alum and an EPP alum, so it's just great to have you here, Christophe. And then Brian Regli, who's the executive director of critical investments for the Commonwealth of PA, and Holly Merriman, who's the program manager for workforce initiatives at the Pittsburgh Gateway Corporation. So welcome. I want to take just a few minutes to set the table and then request each of my colleagues in turn to take 4 minutes to present an opening statement, and then we'll have a set of questions, including hopefully some ability to draw on some questions from you all. First of all, this is a joint effort of the Block Center for Technology and Society and the Scott Center. The Block Center for Technology, you've heard about the Scott Center already, which is hosting this entire workshop. The Block Center is a sister center of the Scott Center, and it has within it a pillar on the responsible use of AI and another major pillar on AI and the future of work. And this effort between Scott and Block is about what are the intersections at the nexus of AI and energy, and this panel is about AI and the energy workforce in all its different aspects, and that's really what I'm excited about. So with that brief introduction, I'm going to request Abby to kick things off. Abby.
Sure, I'm happy to.
4 minutes.
Yeah, I was going to say, someone keep me to that. But I think that when I first heard all these words were going to be on the same panel, I thought about the fact that my background is much more in education and workforce development, actually, than it is in the stuff that I do now. But no matter what, we have to think about the orientation of our workforce, because ultimately anything we do really comes down to people. When you think about AI, there's something about it that feels not necessarily very people-centered. And so as I think about kind of AI, the energy workforce, all the implications of that, I'm thinking in terms of what it looks like to have inclusive approaches to this. Because we can have very Pittsburgh and quite frankly, Philly and maybe a couple other pockets, very urban-centered conversations about this. But the way that we talk about, and certainly from my orientation at Team PA, where I'm thinking about a statewide approach to things and statewide impact, I actually think that AI and energy and earlier the very first keynote of the day talking about data centers and the build out around that, these are actually great entry points to thinking about what an innovation workforce looks like across energy, across AI, and data centers as kind of critical infrastructure. I believe that sometimes we just have to be able to have much more tangible things in our own communities, particularly if the word innovation doesn't feel like it aligns aligns with your orientation. And there's many pockets of Pennsylvania where that's the case. So how do you make it more accessible? How do you make it part of somebody's community? It's really not just where the jobs are, but then also thinking about that accessibility from the infrastructure itself and how you actually can go work there. These data centers being potentially, I think, a great bridge to how we talk about AI, the energy workforce, having jobs in these physical places. So as we talk about this, I'm thinking about it in lots of different ways, but that just kind of gives you hopefully a sense of kind of my orientation and our organization's orientation, which is this kind of inclusive economic development and growth, where energy and AI are, I think, a wonderful vector for what's possible for the future.
So when we brief the governor about these issues, we start from the following baseline, that between now and 2031, there will be between 12 and 20 opportunities in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania to build between 3 and 5 AI factories each at co-located locations where there will be power of between 1 and 2 gigawatts produced to offset the demand that's proximate. To do that, if you want to think about that from a workforce perspective, is going to require about 3,000 people, 3 years to build the infrastructure that will be required both for the data centers and the power generation, which is likely to be in the near term, combination of natural gas and solar and battery, evolving to some of the other technologies that we've talked about today. Once those tools are in place and once those groups are built, you're talking about 200 to 300 well-trained people that are going to linearly manage that facility for 20, 30, 40 years afterwards if you take our existing power generation as an example of the kinds of capabilities that are there. So you start doing the math on that and you realize you need 20 to 30,000 people to build this thing over the next 5 years of very highly specialized people that understand both the engineering and the physical processes of moving dirt and making sure things get built the way they're supposed to get built. And then a couple of thousand people that are going to actually run these locations. And a lot of them are going to be people in the power generation industry that are presently retiring and new people are not coming into this industry. There's a whole variety of problems that we're going to have to address. So that's the problem space that we deal with every day with Governor Shapiro. Within that context of what you've heard today, there's some really interesting things going on. If you think about this in terms of our capacity markets and how we have managed what's called PJM, which is our interconnection service organization, and some of the utilities that we work with, if you add 8 to 10 to 12 to 20 gigawatts of power requirements, there's a reserve margin that they calculate on top of that, which means it gets really, really expensive, which is why those markets are beginning to collapse. What we are trying to do in the governor's office through the lightning plan that the governor has put forward is pull together a series of policy prescriptions that will allow those markets to stabilize, will incent new generation to arise. And you've heard from a Republican and a Democrat about all of the above. Now, granted, the Venn diagram of all of the above on one side and all the above on the other, there is a substantially increasing space where that Venn diagram comes together, and that's really awesome. So the challenge from an intellectual property perspective, from you students out there who are looking for jobs and looking for ways to make a difference, is how do you figure out what that intersection is? Are you part of making power more efficient? Are you part of shaving the peak of these data centers so that, like you had in the original presentation today from Google, that ability to do demand response so that peak is not so high, so that on a high volume day where power is required, you're reducing the proximate requirements within the grid? Are you part of the people that are helping to build and design these plants so that they use less energy, that they're using ground source heating, that they're taking some of these new innovations and making them more and more effective in Pennsylvania? And why do we think it's going to happen in Pennsylvania? We export 35% of our electricity of what's produced in Pennsylvania, which is why you at Carnegie Mellon are actually in a really great place to solve this problem, and why we think this is actually going to happen in places around Pittsburgh and in the western part of the state than pretty much any place else on the East Coast. So I'm going to leave you with one last example. You've heard a company called Mainspring, right? They're building some new capacity here in the Pittsburgh area. For those who don't know, linear generators is kind of cool. It's not internal combustion. It's actually using pressure to move, the magnets to create the charge, to create the electrons. That's really cool. Their emissions profiles are a lot lower too. So they start with natural gas, but you can use ammonia, and you can use hydrogen, and you can use all kinds of other molecules because of how they've developed their technology. So all the exciting things that are happening here, the companies, the innovation, the growth, the fact that we export energy, the fact that you have a governor that is working on this literally every single day to try to make this better for Pennsylvania, you're in the right place to do this work, and hopefully you will be in the right place to be part of the workforce of the future if you're a student, or if you're a participant from industry or stakeholders. Hopefully you're part of the policy process that we're trying to lead to make this a real amazing opportunity for Pennsylvania.
Great. Well, I think building off of comments from both Abby and Brian, One, I spend a lot of my time thinking about workforce readiness. So what is the readiness, not just of the state, but of specific areas in the state, regions, communities, to respond to occupational demand? And I think Brian said it very well, which is that you have an enormous one-time, relatively short-term, compared to the life of the entire infrastructure, demand shock to construct these facilities, and then a potentially much lower long-run demand with potentially a different skill composition. The question, if you're trying to build something fast, is where can you get workers at a time scale that is going to actually let you perform on the investments you're making? And while we have, of course, a robust national workforce that we can recruit from, if you're interested both in economic inclusion, but also in recruitment for a lot of the jobs that are required to build infrastructure, that is not necessarily a workforce that is going to be nationally mobile. And if you do need people who are going to move, you're going to pay a lot to relocate them. It's going to become very, very expensive very quickly. And so thinking about the assets that we have locally within relatively short catchment areas around sites, we're not talking even statewide. We might be talking a commuting zone of 45 minutes from the site, becomes really important. And to first order, this is a data problem, right? How do we know who's here and how do we know what skills they have? Something that we work on a lot, actually, Krishnan and I work on together, is thinking about how to measure that skill availability in local labor markets and to think about which people have the capabilities that are closest to what you need. If you're trying to build new infrastructure, it's unlikely that you're going to have perfect matches abundantly within the local workforce if you're trying to build a new industry. And I would take the data centers as a great example of this, actually. But there are probably adjacent skills that you can look to and existing pipelines that serve those adjacent industries that could be expanded or built on. So it's a question of not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good in terms of labor matching. And then the following question is, how do you induce people to make transitions from one occupation to another? If you have a set of adjacent skills, it's unlikely that you're going to make that transition to a new job unless you're, A, pretty confident that you're going to have at least the same wages, ideally better wages than you did before, and that this is really going to last. There's actually going to be an industry here that is going to carry you through, maybe not for 3 years, but for 30 years. And so thinking about how to make those transitions as painless as possible and seem as secure as possible is going to be vital in terms of connecting those pipelines to demand. So how does AI connect to the energy workforce? Briefly, we've heard about the demand for data centers and behind that, the demand for power infrastructure. Those are both obvious sources of demand for the energy workforce. It's worth considering, though, that AI can also accelerate the rate at which we can train people and accelerate the rate at which we can make those labor connections happen. And so AI augmented training may be a resource for closing those labor gaps on a timescale that is actually feasible and matches the investment horizons for this infrastructure. The last thing that I want to emphasize, though, is that there's a lot of anxiety around AI and its impacts on the workforce from people who are outside the energy workforce. In general, people are experiencing, in some sectors actively, I mean, look at the demand for software engineers, it is cratered over the last 6 months. If you look at hiring data from the Fed, there are people who are actively worried about what their career is going to be and who are looking for resilient options. And so if you want to build an energy workforce, partially you need to convince people to acquire those skills. And under conditions of technical uncertainty, that means you need to convince them that these jobs are robust, they can get them relatively easily, and that they're going to be around for a long time.
Thank you. I'm with Pittsburgh Gateways, and we are the owner, operator, and developer of the Energy Innovation Center on the Lower Hill, which, when it was built in 1930, was the largest trade school in the country. And fortunately, I think when you ask the question, where are we going to get the people to do the work? And the answer is the unions. And so we are working very closely with, we have a program called Introduction to the Construction Trades. It's in its 11th year. It's a pre-apprenticeship. It's a 5-month program, or excuse me, 5 weeks, introducing residents who didn't have a father, grandfather, uncle in the trade unions, were never exposed to the types of careers and really life-changing opportunities that a job in the trades could bring. And so going into our 11th year, we are really focused on feeding those unions. In particular, we're feeding the laborers, the electricians, and the operating engineers, who are the large equipment movers, because when you say who's going to build the data centers, it's the unions. Who's going to repower the wind farms? Who's going to build the solar farms and lay the new pipelines? In this region, the answer is the unions, and I can tell you that they are exceptionally prepared and well-trained. If you're a union electrician, you have gotten very specific training on doing a utility scale solar installation. If you are a union laborer, you know how to lay pipelines. So they're the ones who are the solution to the problem, and we are fortunate that the unions in this region are very, very much looking forward. They're partners with all of the big developers. They want to be ahead of the projects. I'm sure Brian will tell you when something big comes, labor's in the room before the ink is dry, because they're preparing the workforce. I also work closely with the CTEs, formerly known as VOTEC. So those are the high schools who are preparing students for also jobs in the trades. They are at capacity, so that's more good news. The students, their parents of children who are not going to college have heard the message that trades are a great option. The CTEs in this region are full to capacity, and the bad news is they're turning away students who want to be electricians and who want to be HVAC workers. And those are the exact types of employees that we're going to need for this energy transition. So we have a lot of work to do to have a more robust program to fund and manage those CTEs. And I think that's something that we are really going to have to focus on.
Thank you. So, we've had multiple perspectives expressed in these opening remarks. I just want to start with the... Krishnan, need you to turn on your microphone. Oh, all right. Thought I was being loud. Okay. Is this good? Okay. Thank you. You've heard multiple perspectives expressed in these opening remarks. I want to begin with sort of a broad opening question to my panelist colleagues. If you think about all of the Commonwealth as where the opportunity lies, I think what each of you have described is an amazing opportunity at this nexus of AI and energy on account of this energy transition. And workforce is a key aspect of it. Training, and making sure we have the right people for this transition. How might this not be limited to just the cities, but across the Commonwealth, while at the same time sort of ensuring nobody feels left behind? What might be a way to address that? Brian, you want to go first?
Well, I would say, first and foremost, and Christophe actually articulated very, very well, these projects are going to require local hiring. Most of these projects are not going to happen within 30 miles of Pittsburgh. They're going to happen within 300 miles of Pittsburgh, but not 30 miles of Pittsburgh, most likely, because many of these power generation facilities are going to be impactful to local communities. And frankly, there's a lot of power plants in Pennsylvania that have been turned off in the last 20 years. And the more likely places where this is going to start are facilities like Homer City or up the river in Cheswick or some of the other locations where there was a power plant once there and now there will be a data center with a new source of power. The challenge, I think, is not just about enfranchising local geographic communities, but also creating the community of practice. And this is where I think the Energy Innovation Center is a really important role to play. The students who are in the room, I don't think many of you are going to be the type of students, my guess at CMU, that you're going to go build the circuit breaker, right? You're probably going to be doing the civil engineering or the power engineering or the mechanical engineering or whatever it may happen to be to actually design the thing to bring it to life, right? All of these new innovations, eventually some engineer needs to stamp a document. It needs to get a permit at a local municipality that's got to read the code, the municipal code on how this thing's supposed to get built. And I can tell you that explaining that, not just to the local municipality, but also to the person who's actually going to wire it on site, is a challenge, right? Some of this is geographic, making sure that the people who are in Indiana County who can do the work can do the work. but that you don't sit in an office in Pittsburgh comfortably putting a stamp on a piece of paper that the person in Indiana County doesn't understand, right? A lot of this is getting in your car and going to Indiana County and going to the site and sitting with the union foreman from the IBW and saying, this is a little different because that generator that you thought you were putting in, well, this is a mainspring generator, and it actually like sends a different, a different signal than your traditional, thing that you're used to working with, right? I can't even begin to describe to you how fascinating that opportunity is going to be for all of you young people, because I'm too damn old to understand it. You are young enough to get it, right? So I think there's a couple layers of this, right? It's not just where do we need people. We need them, frankly, where they're presently not. How do we need to teach them? Well, it's not just telling them to do the thing they did before, it's transmitting these new experiences and this new knowledge into those communities. And then, frankly, that's the community of practice that emerges that this country needs, because God knows most of the people that are going to be doing the installing, they got Trump stickers on the back of their car. Most of the people that are going to be doing the designing, they probably had Biden stickers on the back of their car. And that's another big problem, right? Because we need both of those communities to work together to build any of these damn things. So let's keep that in mind. And that's why our governor constantly talks about all the above and seeking common ground. Because if we can't do that, none of these things are going to get built.
Thank you, Brian. Abby?
Yeah, I'm going to pick up on some of what Brian was talking about and some of the things I mentioned in kind of my opening remark, and where Christophe and where Holly took the conversation. But the other night, I was out to dinner with a colleague who works in the Shapiro administration, who asked this question: why do the data centers, though, have to be sited in Pennsylvania? That's actually not a given. Like, we're going to use them, Why do they have to be sited here? And I've been thinking about that question quite a bit, and thinking about it in the context of kind of AI and the energy workforce. And it goes back to this point I was making about something tangible in your own community. I think part of it is also, to Christophe's point, that a lot of the workers who ultimately manage those data centers have a certain amount of transferable skills. There's things that come with that allow for whatever the future looks like. Because I do think that there's always going to be a certain amount of uncertainty when it comes to what those future career opportunities look like. But we have this expectation that there will be quite a bit grounded in AI, in technology, in kind of our STEM-based skills, and then also kind of how we utilize AI, right? So when I think about how do we make this inclusive, we have to make it accessible. We have to make it something that is real and tangible within a community that we can see and know contributes to our use of computers. And there's all kinds of things that come with that too, right? We have to make sure that we have accessible platforms for people to actually utilize. But we do have outside of this, we have actually quite a number of assets within the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania when it comes to our education and training institutions. We're known for it. But that doesn't necessarily mean that this transition to thinking about what the future looks like is an obvious one for everybody. And so I do think this is something where the more that we kind of talk about this, connect on this, understand this, make this actually information that people can grasp onto and see what the impact looks like. This is actually something where the demographic trajectory in our state, which is not one that's increasing, can actually support, because we're not talking about a workforce need that is too daunting for us to support that kind of technology build out. But if we start to think about data centers as the critical infrastructure that allows for AI, which can potentially be really transformative across a lot of different industries, we're talking about then suddenly a very inclusive approach, because we're not just talking about the workers at a data center. We're not just talking about the workers that build the data center. We're not just talking about an energy worker. What we're really talking about is what's a result of those investments in every single aspect, every pocket of our communities and the different jobs that are there. And so I think that this is going to be an interesting transition where we've always thought of ourselves as an energy state in different ways, and there are really different identities to that in different little pockets of the state. But this is a moment where the energy part of this and the story that we tell ourselves about the energy workforce needs to kind of meet up with what innovation, AI, and tech look like. And I think that this is a state that, in this region, we talk about innovation in this really positive way. And I will tell you that that is not as well received in other places within the state. So how do we make it well received? We have to make it something that actually is real. And we have to think about, I think, this overall understanding of how in Pennsylvania, what we do is not just innovation for innovation's sake, we put innovation to work. And so I think there's something really valuable in this moment about how we talk about this, how we actually think about the assets that exist right here in Pittsburgh and all across the state. And this is a moment where coming together makes a huge difference. And it sounds a lot easier than I think it actually is. But I think that if we start to talk about this as kind of a cohesive conversation, it's why I was really excited. Before anybody even asked me to be part of, speaking up here, the second I saw that AI and energy were the topics for this week, I, registered immediately because this is a conversation that, I have the pleasure of getting to work across, all corners and pockets of the state. And so this is very much a conversation that's relevant on a day-to-day basis. And the more that we bring it to communities, the better off we're going to be.
Can I just add one other quick thing that I'd actually like Christophe and Holly to extend? In a world where demographics are flat, the only way you can get the people you need is by finding folks who are marginalized who have not been part of it. That's women, that's people of color, those are people who are not generally on these construction sites. They're people that we should enfranchise and train to be on these construction sites. So I would love to, what you just heard us talk about from a policy perspective, you academically, you in the field actually doing the work. I would love you to talk a little bit about how those factors may fit into the general framework of what we just talked about.
So happy to respond to that. I'm going to start, though, by exercising my privilege as an engineering professor to say something very nerdy, which is picking up on the hardware point, right? That there is real value in having co-design of excellent AI solutions and hardware, right? A lot of the breakthroughs in AI performance are not just software breakthroughs. They are software breakthroughs enabled by a deep understanding of hardware. So when we talk about why Pennsylvania for data centers, partially, I do think Pittsburgh has a really important role to play there. That insofar as we are at the frontier of development, or one of the institutions that is at the frontier of development, there's a natural complementarity for co-location. And so we do need to go deeper into the supply chain and engage other aspects of the workforce. But I do think that our history of innovation is a compelling reason for co-location because of that hardware interconnect advantage. To pick up on your point, though, I think there are two points that have really stood out to me. One, just reinforcing on the demographics, is that some of our skills and some of our skilled workforce atrophies if it's not used. And so it's going to be really important when we think about communities that used to have a power plant that has diminished in size. Actually, my grandparents were from Cheswick, so I know exactly about this. My great-grandfather was the superintendent of the plant. So
the boiler just came down, and they do have plans that they're working on. So you may have to go back and work with them.
Right.
I was going to say, you got kids yet? I mean, they may need a job.
Yeah, right. But the point is that those are real histories, and they fit an identity. But there may not be an active, skilled workforce ready to pick that identity back up immediately. And so when we talk about inclusion, I think we also need to recognize that we're backfilling an atrophy of skill. I think in terms of inclusion, the other piece is how far we search. So if I think about the models that Krishnan and I work on, one of the big questions we have is, well, how much skill similarity can you tolerate? And to put that in more concrete terms, how close of a match do I need to be with my current skill set to the skills that are required for this job? Or how much of a gap needs to be closed? And the wider the gap, the more costly it's going to be to close. Potentially, you're going to have to accept some lead time, some lower productivity at the outset, some investment in training. A lot of people, particularly from more marginalized communities, are going to have wider gaps because they don't work in adjacent industries. And so this has implications for how we invest in training and which communities we focus on and how we design training programs, maybe that don't close the smallest marginal gap, but rather that close a gap that enable us to engage another community or a group that's not been included. I suppose the last thing I would just say on that point is we often focus, when we talk about jobs and good jobs, on absolute wages and absolute compensation. That's great, and I think it's very important that we talk about good family-sustaining work. I'm somewhat more interested in the delta for a person. Where were they before and where are they now? If we create a job that is highly paid, but requires a 4-year degree and that is just never going to be held by anyone who's currently making far less in a precarious labor market situation, we've created a good job that doesn't actually include people. And so I think we should focus more on the delta than on the maximum if we're interested in inclusion.
Yeah, Holly, comment on this.
Okay, I'll answer Brian's question first and then yours. in recruiting for intro to the trades, I can tell you that we are focusing on the underemployed. So, because you can't not send someone who's completely unskilled and does not have the experience of going to work and having a full-time job and put them in a labor union and expects them to be successful. So the success model is someone who is unloading trucks at the back of a Walmart or a Target, someone working in fast food, someone who is work ready but is in a career or in a job that is, we would have called it a dead-end job, that there's just no opportunity for a career. So that's the sweet spot for recruiting for union opportunities for people who are really from underserved communities. Women in the trades, the numbers have increased drastically, but when you start with 2% and you quadruple it, it's still a pretty small number. But I can tell you that the process of recruiting women into the trades, it's happening, and it's being greatly helped by TikTok, as a matter of fact, because you may not know this, but underwater welding is a big thing. So there are trades who are doing a lot of social media, and it is attracting a lot of women to the trades. And then to answer your question about communities outside of the cities, I think that this is like such a huge learning moment for all the students in the audience who will probably all live in cities for their entire lives. You need to get out of the city, and you need to explore the rest of our country, because half of the country is not in a city. And those people have jobs, they need jobs, they're building things, they're building a lot of things. There's a lot happening out there. And one thing that we've done at Pittsburgh Gateways is we partnered with RK Mellon to do a program called, it was first called Town and Gown. I'm just going to call it that because I think that's really cute. But that's going to the, it's going to towns like Meadville, where Allegheny College is, going to Johnstown, where Pitt Johnstown is, and Washington, PA, where W&J is, and just helping the colleges forge partnerships with their towns, where in the past, many of those towns just had an unhealthy relationship with their towns, and they're really embracing the opportunity to be part of bringing those towns back to health. Allegheny, for example, in Meadville, Meadville was known for its machinists. That industry went downhill. It went downhill fast, so there is a lot of latent skill there. And Vitro is going to open up a new solar panel glass making facility. So we'll be working with them to help them find the workers and use the skills that they have, and to use those historical assets that they have.
Thank you. We had a very comprehensive set of responses from each of our panel members. I'd like to go to the audience and see if you have any questions for our panelists. Feel free to raise your hand, and we'll make sure you get a...
Any students have a question? We'll prioritize theirs first. And everyone else.
To confirm, I am a student. My question is, I'm seeing a lot of parallels in how America looked at the CHIPS Act and the semiconductor. Hey, we need more types of labor. This is transferable. We need to build plants. We need to diversify these little city pockets. And I think you mentioned latent abilities and transferring them over. How would that look like in terms of taking like blue collar workers and introducing them to these new innovative technologies? And you guys are of different interests and of sectors, and how do you come together to encourage them on a state level, promote them at an academic level, and also do research on it from an institute level as well? Sorry.
So it happens that Krishnan and I have a paper about this.
Yeah, I know. But keep your answers short so that we can get maybe more than one question.
And you go first. I have my, go.
So I think the first point is there's a job design component to this, right? There are some things that have to get done from a task standpoint in order for the process to operate, whether that's running a data center or running a semiconductor fab. But there are also choices about how you design the job and which tasks people are responsible for. And that's an opportunity to bridge between where people are now and the set of skills that you want them to build in the future.
That was well done.
Like this guy deserves the PhD that he got. Take their class. He knows what he's talking about. I want to just tell you a story. The governor went out to visit the Keystone Power Plant, which is one of 2 remaining coal-fired power plants in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. We walked through and talked to literally dozens of workers. And those coal-fired power plants, they know, all of them need to know, we know that they need to be shut down eventually, right? Sooner rather than later, given the nature of climate change. You have 450 people there, mostly white men, that have spent their lives building and running and have extraordinary pride in that power plant, right? We have to celebrate their skills. We have to celebrate their knowledge. We have to bring more resources to them. We have to broaden the scope of people that can work in facilities like that. You've got 2,500 acres of land surrounding those power plants. You have water resources, and all of you who work in engineering know you don't have power without water, right? These are the communities, these are the places, right? So it's also about the physical spaces that you design as well as the jobs that you design relative to the things that you do that you want to build there, right? All of these business opportunities you've been hearing about today is not only an opportunity to innovate with new technologies and new sustainable resources, but also in job creation, in physical spaces, in utilization of resources. All of that is the palette of colors that you all get to paint with when you get involved in this problem space. And if we're going to succeed in Pennsylvania, because to Abby's point, it could go elsewhere, I'd like them to come here, it's going to be because we use the adjacency that the professor just mentioned, the knowledge that we have, the physical resources they have, the geology that we have, and the people that we have to take advantage of all of that.
Thank you. I think there's a question back here.
Any questions on the other side of the room, just to make sure we're covering the geography of the room? Yep.
Thank you. Being a former blue-collar worker turned green-collar, there's plenty of hope out there to go from blue-collar to green-collar work. This question is one of, if any of you panelists were exiting out of university now, what would you look for in the job market to start off, to give a little bit of inspiration to students coming out of university here at CMU for their future? What would you do? What would be your next action?
No, we're about to post a job for an energy director, and so I'm very biased because I know the specific skills that you get out of this institution, and so consider come working for me. But that's a really good question about what it looks like to kind of be part of this. There's a lot of flux right now too, right? Because I do think that we saw a kind of one administration at the federal level really try to go in one direction when it came to industrial policy, and like a lot of things shifted as a result. And there's certain things that right now are entirely uncertain, still in flux, and I think that there's still going to be a lot of kind of shifting around for a lot of the folks who are right now, coming out of this room or, this institution looking for a job. And some of the people who are involved in those projects are going to be in that job market with you, looking for a job. And so I think some of it is, it's hard for me to kind of answer that because there really is so much. And I think it was Christophe who said earlier, just that it is a little bit intimidating too when we think specifically about kind of AI touching anything, about what kinds of jobs are or are not going to be there. I heard somebody say something, a few weeks ago in our manufacturing collaborative. We were talking about AI in manufacturing. And I got to tell you, we just had like jaws dropped as people were talking about the ways that they're doing things. A small manufacturer, like 100-person shop, the CEO of a small manufacturer has 15 jobs that are not people. They are job descriptions with scopes of work, with KPIs, and they are all AI bots who have very specific roles within the organization. Somebody else was talking about, their own, anyway, we got a whole panel together. And, but one of those CEOs said, it's not going to be AI that takes your job. It's someone who knows how to use AI that's going to take your job, right? So I think part of it is then looking at organizations that are embracing technology in lots of different ways, that are willing to kind of, even if you have to have guardrails on it, like they have a sandbox. Because I think that no matter what, we know that this is ever evolving. We know that it's hitting folks fast at all different sizes of organizations. And so where you're coming out of an institution like this one, a university that embraces real creativity and expansive thought, and you have the opportunity to work with professors of all these different, different kind of disciplines and the intersection of those disciplines, then it's a matter of kind of what you go and do with that. Can be potentially a huge kind of expansive multiplier, or it can be something where you are in a contained space. And I think that what we are continually understanding, it goes beyond like the specifics of the energy workforce, is that the more we take advantage of what those explosive opportunities look like, it's our own creativity, it's how we all work with one another, it's how we take the tools that you come out with here and then kind of use it in lots of different ways and shapes and forms. And so while that is the least specific answer that you could possibly imagine, and I think others will talk about where within the energy work, where are those space, growth spaces and things like that. I actually think you could, those of you, I saw like everybody taking a picture of the pie chart when the speaker from Google and the keynote was showcasing, all the different, it was that pie chart with the 3 different elements. This is really, there's a lot within the energy workforce, right? And so there's a lot of different spaces and places. But when it comes to like the career advice, I'd say like, where can you play around in the sandbox?
2 sentences. You want to understand the underlying foundationals of the technology if you're going to use it. Second, people who just know how to press a button and use the tech are going to be the second ones to go after the people who are being replaced by the technology.
I would say a good interview question is ask a potential employer what professional development opportunities exist in that job. How can you get more certifications? How do they support additional education? How do you make sure that your skills are constantly keeping up with the industry? And I would say if you're someone who's looking, if you have someone who comes to you and is not going to college, what should they look for? The answer is an apprenticeship. It doesn't have to be a union apprenticeship. It can be a manufacturing apprenticeship. There are a lot of organizations who are taking the model of an apprenticeship and applying it to jobs that never did before. And that really sends a message that you're working for a company who cares about upskilling their employers and investing in their employees.
It is highly unlikely that the thing you have gone to school for is the problem that you're going to solve in the workforce. You're looking for an opportunity to explore the problems that you learned how to solve in college and find a community of practice that will allow you to grow. And it doesn't necessarily matter if that community of practice is exactly what you studied or adjacent to what you studied. As long as you're in the mode of learning and as long as you're in the mode of applying that learning to practical real-world applications, you're going to do great. You're at a great school. It's got great opportunities in front of you.
I guess I'll just add one other thing. I just gave a talk on this morning before I came here. I think it's the view that there is a zero fixed pie and technology is going to substitute for people, I think is short-sighted in my view. Almost every example of an industrial revolution we have been through, it's been very hard to predict where there's growth and where there is likely going to be augmentation and where there's substitution. You can go from automated teller machines when they predicted that there will be no more bank tellers, and we have more bank tellers today than when ATMs came in. Now, is it the case that some jobs are likely going to be substituted out or some tasks are going to be substituted out? Absolutely. But there's also going to be new opportunities. So I'd say, I think all the responses given are great ones, good advice. I think we are on to our final question back there.
One last question.
We got a room full of people here who are involved in this technology and in startups and things. Oh great, my alarm goes off. The quick question is, what kind of resources does CMU have for people who want to reach out to those 450 people who need the work or the places that have the acreage and the water? Does CMU have anything where you're getting involved in the startup community or other places where people can find those places where the skills are needed?
So let me quickly respond to this, and my colleagues here might as well. Absolutely. The university has tremendous amount of resources in this regard. So if you're in the community and want to engage with the university, the Schwartz Center on campus is a great place to connect into, where there's a lot of entrepreneurial activity going on. The engineering school has an entrepreneurship and innovation center, and so do other parts of the university. There's also a business engagement center at the university that you can reach out to. See me offline, and I'm happy to connect you. Thank you very much. Any other final thoughts, folks? Final remarks, 1 minute to close the panel out. Abby?
I would say that if you're doing something alone, you're doing it wrong. And that our kind of way of working is just grounded in collaboration. And so I would just say that, this is not something that we're going to solve in individual silos or as individuals. And so, find the partners to collaborate with. It's going to take a real coalition of the willing.
It's really easy to fall into despair when you look at what happens in politics these days. And as someone who works in politics as a profession, some days I share that despair. I would remind everyone in this room that, even in an environment where the forest is burning and the fire suppression systems seem to be offline and there's a lot of problems happening, forests do get regrown. People do have an opportunity to replant, and in some cases that ecosystem comes back much more robust. We can still work on the problems that we have together, irrespective of the chaos that might be occurring around. And hopefully some of the things that you heard today are really about the positive energy, literally, that we can bring to problem spaces like AI so that we can continue to make a difference even in the most difficult times. So your passion and your trust and the truth that comes from that work is one of the most important values that I think we're all going to need over the next few years. So I would ask you to keep that trust, to keep that work going, and to work with us to try to make Pennsylvania a better place.
There we go. There we are. I think one of the most important things when it comes to building an industry is to keep in mind that it fits into an ecosystem of not only training, but other adjacent industries and entire supply chain. On the one hand, that can be very daunting in its complexity. There are so many different things that connect to so many others. On the other hand, it means that we have opportunities to interconnect them and find new complementarities that we may not have thought of. And so whether that's thinking about workforce, finding people who are not a perfect match, but adjacent and can be brought in to meet what would otherwise seem like an insurmountable skill gap. I think we have similar opportunities in Pennsylvania in particular across the supply chain to merge across industries to say, this is not just an investment in capacity that affects this narrow sector or this narrow bottleneck. It could be pivoted to respond to other demands elsewhere. And so we don't need to know everything about what's going to happen in the future to be responsive and resilient. We can instead just think about ways in which those interconnections can strengthen the whole ecosystem.
Yes, I just want to say again to the students, being here is one of the best things you can do for your career. Do not leave without making at least a couple connections with people from industry who are here in the room. And if you're here from industry, make sure you meet a couple of students. They're impressive. Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much. Please join me in thanking the panelists.